Good afternoon. This is Rabbi Ed Feinstein of Valley Beth Shalom, and this is Lunch and Learn. I hope that you're taking very, very good care of yourself and your families, your friends, and those about you. I hope they are self-isolating and observing the guidelines and protecting yourself from this terrible malady. These days, people are getting ready for Pesach, so please, I would urge you to take a look at the resources that VBS is putting up. We had a seminar last night led by my colleagues Rabbi Hoffman and Rabbi Farkas on how to lead a Seder on Zoom and on Facebook. And you'll find that it's on the the Valley Beth Shalom Facebook page. And tomorrow night, I'll be leading a seminar with the educators of VBS to talk about how to create an engaging Seder for families with young children, families with elementary school kids, and families with teenagers as well as with adults. So all of these ways to make this Seder a very special way, a very special Seder. We're trying to answer the great ancient question, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, and it's pretty clear that halayla hazeh, things are going to be very different. This year things are very different, but we can still make this a very special time for individuals and for families who are celebrating the Passover, and that's going to be our goal. So take a look online, vbs.org, and just click on the VBS at Home logo, and you'll get a listing of all of our online programs and all of the offerings and resources that we're offering folks to make this Passover so very, very special. As well, I want to just give one last announcement. The VBS Food Bank, like many of the food banks in the community, is serving many, many dozens of families, and because of the difficulties in grocery shopping, the food bank is rather depleted. So if you would have opportunity, if you make your way into Gelson's or to Ralph's or to Vons or to Costco and can pick up some staples, some canned goods or other kinds of staples, and drop them off at the synagogue, you'll be doing a huge mitzvah in protecting those in our community who have a whole lot less than we do. So I want to welcome everyone who's coming to learn with us today. We have been looking at the book of Exodus, at the first chapters of Exodus, in preparation for Passover. We've done chapters 1 and 2, and today we're going to do chapters 3 and 4. I'm going to confess to you at the outset that this chapter 3 and chapter 4, is a mystery. It's a mystery to me, and I hope that we can understand it together if we work together. It's a mystery because the Bible doesn't waste words. That is, the Bible is incredibly economical when it comes to using any words. And here you have a chapter and a half, 2 chapters, which in a certain way you could tell the story without them. These are the chapters of Moses' encounter with the burning bush and the conversation between God and Moses at the burning bush. And the traditional way of reading Bible in the Jewish faith is that whenever you come across a section of Bible that doesn't seem to make sense, the traditional rubric is Mikra Zel Mer Darsheni. It's like the Mikra, it's like the text of the Torah is saying, come and interpret me. Which is to say, there are levels of meaning to the text which are not immediately apparent. There are levels of meaning to the text that one has to go and inquire and look for. The text itself is not self-conscious. There's no author's introduction that says, here's how I want you to read this particular text. But the text itself hints to us that there's more going on here than simply what's on the surface. And we have to go deeper and find what's there beneath the surface of the text. So let's take a look together. If you have a Bible, any Bible is fine. The JPS is the translation that I'm using. Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So there is this magical mountain in the middle of the desert, which is going to play a tremendous role in the imagination of the Jewish people. It's going to be Horeb. It's also called Mount Sinai. This is the mountain where God lives. Or some people say this is the mountain where we gained our sense of God's presence in the world. When Elijah is running away from Jezebel, he runs out to the desert, to that mountain. Jesus runs out to the desert, to that mountain. This is the mountain where you go to reclaim a sense of the transcendent quality of your life. Now, what's really odd, by the way, is that in 1979, Menachem Begin, Prime Minister of Israel, gave the Sinai Desert back to the Egyptians, and nobody protested that he was giving Mount Sinai back to the Egyptians. So it's a magic mountain because God lives on that mountain, and it's a magic mountain. It's a magic mountain as long as God lives on that mountain. Otherwise, it's just a mountain in the desert. You know, the argument is you can't give up any part of Jerusalem, but the magic mountain in the desert you're allowed to give up. It's a magic mountain because it has a resonance with divinity on that mountain. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a burning fire out of a bush. He gazed, and there was a bush all aflame, yet the bush was not consumed. Moses said, I must turn aside to look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called out for him from the bush, Moshe, Moshe, Moses, Moses, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. A symbol. God wants to attract his attention, so he puts a burning bush. Now, the tradition has had a long, long conversation about why a burning bush. What's the symbolism of a burning bush? Of the passion, the heat, the power of God's presence in the world, and yet the bush is not consumed. It's not burned up. The human being who takes God into his life is consumed and impassioned, inflamed, verbrennt, you say in Yiddish, but not burned up. And one commentator points out something I think which is very practical. He says, he was sitting once in front of a fire in his fireplace, and he was watching the logs in the fireplace burning. And it occurred to him that you'd have to watch a fireplace a very long time to realize that the fire was burning, but the logs were not burned up. That this image of a burning bush requires a certain persistence of attention, a real sense of concentration. And that what Moses demonstrated was that concentration, his ability to pay attention for a sustained amount of time without just walking away. After all, what's more common in a desert mountain than just a bush? And a bush on fire is not so uncommon. These things happen all the time. But you'd really have to look at it and pay attention to it to realize that this thing is burning, but it's not burning up. And that quality of persistent attention, of concentrated attention, is actually what attracted God to Moshe. The Midrash is that the bush has been burning since the day the world was created, and the bush burns to this day. And the question is, can you see it? I mean, imagine this, that there's an invitation to encounter divinity in every moment, that there's an invitation to encounter God's angel in every moment. It's only a question about whether you're persistent enough to see it. That's really the symbolism of the bush. So let's see what he says. He calls to Moshe, Moshe, Moshe. And of course, at this point, there's a marvelous question of how did Moses know it was God? I'll tell you just a very brief digression, if I could. There was a movie made some years ago called Prince of Egypt. It was an animated version of the Exodus story. It was made by a DreamWorks studio, one of their first productions. Jeffrey Katzenberg was the producer of the movie. And in order to make sure that they wouldn't offend religious communities, they invited a bunch of us, a bunch of rabbis, ministers, priests, religious teachers, imams, to come in to watch the rushes of the movie as they were making the movie, and they asked us many different questions. I'll tell you this, it's interesting. The last scene of the movie that they made was this scene. They had created the visuals, but they had a long argument at DreamWorks Studio about who should the voice of God be. And I was one of the people invited. I actually got to go twice. And Katzenberg is there, and he says, okay, who's God? And I said, that's a silly question. James Earl Jones is God, right? I am your father, Luke Skywalker. He said, no, we don't want to do that. Too masculine. So I said, okay, how about Lauren Bacall or Kathleen Turner or Scarlett Johansson, which is as close to divinity as I aspired to get. They say, no, we don't want to do it specific. You don't want to have it masculine or feminine. And at some point they thought also about having maybe a choir. It's Nina once again. Having a choir of people. But the whole notion of the story is monotheism. So you can't have multiple voices. And then what they ended up doing is very clever. They ended up doing pretty much the same thing that the great scholar Cecil B. DeMille had done 50 years earlier. There is a midrash, there is a rabbinic tradition that the reason why Moses stopped and listened to the voice of God, even though he didn't know who God was because the voice spoke to him in his father's voice. Moses heard his father's voice. And then there is another tradition, a sort of gloss on that tradition, which says Moses heard his own voice. Now imagine that for a moment. That the voice that came from the burning bush calling Moses out of his private life and into the job of liberating the Jewish people, it was his own voice, which is to say that for the rabbi who wrote that midrash, that was the voice of conscience. That was the inner voice of God. That's a remarkable idea. Cecil B. DeMille, when he made the movie The Ten Commandments, used Charlton Heston's voice as the voice of God. It just slowed it down a little bit of an octave. And Katzenberg ended up doing the same thing. It was Val Kilmer from Top Gun who played the voice of Moses, and Val Kilmer's voice also plays the voice of God. That's an interesting solution to the problem. So let's go back to the text. God says to him, Moses, Moses, he says, Hineni, he says, do not come closer, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground. You're in a holy place. This is not normal. You are now out of the world. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Does Moses know he's Jewish? Now, in the previous section, we remember that Moses' birth mother nursed him. And in those days, babies nursed for quite a while. And it's entirely possible that he imbibed not only his mother's milk, but the identity of being an Israelite. And we know that scene in the last chapter, when Moses comes to the rescue of a slave, it says Me'echav, one of his brethren. But does Moses know that he's an Israelite? And what on earth does Moses know of the God of his ancestors? And how does he know this is? What does he know of this God? So this is an introduction. I am the God of your people. And maybe what God is trying to say to him is that you are an Israelite. You have an identity. You're no longer, because think about Moses' identity at this point. He was born an Israelite. He was raised an Egyptian. And for the last 40 years, he's been living with the Midianites as the son-in-law of the high priest of Midian. This is a man of multiple identities and questionable identification. So when God says to him, I am the God of your ancestors, this is an introduction that he's never had before. This is something that he's never heard before. The Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. I'm mindful of their suffering. I have come down to rescue them. That's an interesting elocution, don't you think? From the Egyptians to bring them to the land, a good and spacious land, the land of all the peoples, the Canaanites who live there. And the Lord... Now, the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I've seen how Egyptians oppress them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. Typically, the Bible does not tell us the inner life of a character. It tells us what they do. It tells us what they say. It tells us what happens to them. But it doesn't reveal the inner life of a character. It doesn't tell us, for example, when Abraham is told by God, take your son, your only one, the one you love, take Isaac to the mountain and kill him there. Offer him as a sacrifice to me. It doesn't tell us what Abraham's heart told him at that point, what his emotions were. And here too, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, to Moses, I want you to go back to Pharaoh and free my people. And it doesn't tell us what Moses is feeling. What is Moses feeling at this point? It's been 40 years. 40 years he lives in the desert with the Midianites. 40 years he tends sheep. 40 years he has been a private person away from the Egyptian palace. 40 years. And now he's called back to go back to the Egyptians, back to Egypt, and to redeem his people. And who are his people? Remember the last encounter they had? In case you forget, you can actually turn back to the end of chapter 2 and take a look. The first day he went out and saved an Israelite from a cruel Egyptian taskmaster. But the second day, remember what happened back in chapter 2, in verse number 13. When he went out the next day, he found two Hebrews fighting. Hebrew is interesting, by the way. It doesn't say Israelites. Hebrews is the way that the Bible refers to Israelites, to Jews, when non-Jews are in the room. Non-Jews see us as Hebrews. So for Moses, who's still seeing the world through Egyptian eyes, he sees two Hebrews fighting. And he says to one of them, why are you beating on your fellow? Yesterday, it was an Egyptian beating on him. Now it's this guy beating on him. And he, the slave, the Hebrew, retorted to him, who made you chief and ruler over us? Now that's familiar to anybody who's ever taken a leadership role in the Jewish community. We've never stopped that. When you have a people who begins its career under the conditions of tyranny, any expression of authority, anyone who steps up and says, I'll be the leader, I'll make the decision, I'll guide this people, is immediately suspect. Immediately suspect. Anyone who's ever stepped up to be president of anything in the Jewish community knows how true this is. And here's Moses, the very first one. And he looks at him and says, who died made you king? And what's ironic, of course, is that Moses is a prince of Egypt. And this is a slave. And this is the way you talk to a prince of Egypt. And yet, that is going to be Moses' last recollection, his last experience of the Israelites until this moment. So when God comes to him and says, I want you to go back to Egypt and free my people, what's Moses thinking? What's Moses thinking? Now, again, I'm going to warn you, if you read the Midrash, or if you have Orthodox relatives, what that way of reading the text typically does is flatten the character. They sort of empty out the character, make him hollow. They make them into good guys with white hats and bad guys with black hats, and they flatten out the emotional sophistication of the text. I think the text here is hinting to us in a very strong language that Moses is conflicted. He ran away from Egypt, not just to escape to Pharaoh. He ran away from Egypt because his identity, it was too hard to live a double identity as Israelite and Egyptian. It was too hard to be child of slaves and prince of Egypt. It was too hard to be a leader. And he ran away. He ran away to become a shepherd in the desert. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but leading sheep is a hell of a lot easier than leading Jews. And he's conflicted at this point. What would it mean to leave behind the pastoral life of a shepherd and go back to the urban center of Egypt and confront the Pharaoh? What would it be like to go back, to leave behind the quiet life, the natural life, the sort of normal rhythms of life, and step into the world of politics again? What would it be like to go back to who he was before? Is this something that Moses wants to do? And would he want to be part of that people? That people that pushed him away 40 years earlier? Would he want anything to do with them? This is a conflicted man. And now the conflict inside of him is going to be spelled out in the text ahead. Watch what happens. 5 times he's going to push God away. Look at each one of them and look at the question that each one of them raises. Question, first time, verse 11. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And then God's going to say, I'll be with you, and that'll be your sign. First question, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I? I'm a shepherd. I'm a private man. I'm not a politician anymore. I have no political role anymore. I have no political acumen anymore. I'm not a leader. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Says Moses. Who am I? Am I Israelite? Am I Egyptian? Am I Midianite? Am I a leader? Am I a shepherd? Who am I? What role is my role in life? And I want you to remember, he's a grown-up. I mean, many of us asked that question when we were 17. Many of us asked that question when we were 20, 21. Many of us asked that question as we were growing into adulthood. And somehow the idea, at least in our culture, in American culture, is that when you reach adulthood, you somehow sort of settle those issues and you settle into career, into family, you nest and you build and you become the person you are. But the Bible's indicating something quite beautiful here. This is a man, according to the tradition, he's 80 already. This is a man of some maturity. Cut that in half, he's 40. This is a man of some maturity. And in his maturity, the question occurs to him, who am I? What am I doing in the world? What's my role in the world? What's my place in the world? Who are my people in the world? Who do I belong to in the world? Who am I responsible to in the world? This is a man having a full-on midlife crisis. Who am I that I should go back? And God says to him, you're not going, I'm going. You're just going for me. But that's not enough for Moses because he doesn't know who this God is. That's one of the questions of identity. Who do I worship? What's important to me? So here's the second pushing back. Ready? Verse 13, second time. Moses says to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, they will ask, what is his name? What am I supposed to say? Now that's a very interesting question. When I come to the Israelites and they say, what is God's name? Now, one way to read that is that they're going to ask me for the secret handshake. They're going to ask me for the secret Jewish password. I was raised in the Egyptian palace. I don't know the secret password. They know something I don't know about being an Israelite. What am I going to say to them when they ask me for that identification? But that's not the question, because look at the answer. The answer is even deeper than that. The answer points to the fact that the question is even deeper than that. God says to him, God says, Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh. And you'll notice in the text, if your text is like mine, they don't translate that. I will be what I will be is what it translates exactly. You will say, thus you will say to the Israelites, Ehiyeh, I will be, sent me to you. And God says, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. The second question is, okay, who am I? Who are you? When you ask someone's name, at least in the Bible, you're asking for their nature, for their essence, for their identity, for what they are. Who are you? You understand that this story violates all sorts of canons of ancient theology. Number one, gods in the ancient world were local. The god of Reseda doesn't cross boundaries into Canoga Park. The god of Encino has nothing to do with Tarzana. When you go to Tarzana, you worship the gods of Tarzana. When you come to Encino, you worship the gods of Encino. And if you're crazy enough to cross the hill and go into Westwood, you're going to worship the god of Westwood. But here you have a god of a people that began in Canaan, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet here he is in the Sinai desert, sending Moses into Egypt to redeem his people and bring them out. This God is not local. This God has no geography. That's very strange. More than that, this is a God of whom? A God of slaves? Slaves are the lowest people in a society. Slaves are not just persecuted and oppressed. Slaves have no status. There's no. You want to be a god of somebody? Be the god of the Dodgers. They're winners. Be the god of powerful people. Be the god of the aristocracy. Be the god of the oligarchy. Be the god of kings. Don't be the god of slaves. What kind of god lets his people be slaves and then shows up 400 years later and says, I'm ready to take them out? Moses is asking a very deep question. Who are you? And God says to him, I can't tell you. I can't even give you a name you can pronounce. Let's just think about that for a minute. We have a name of God you can't pronounce. In the Bible, God's name is written Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey. We don't pronounce it. We say the word Adonai, but Adonai is Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. Yud-Hey, Vav-Hey, no one pronounces that name. What kind of name of a God you don't pronounce? I mean, what good is a name if you can't pronounce it? The point is that you can't capture this God. Here, Ehiyeh, Asher Ehiyeh, I will be what I will be. I am not being, I am becoming. I am dynamic. I am moving through time. Things happen around me. That's what you need to know. This is a dynamic God. My essence is irrelevant. What's important is what happens around me, what I'm bringing to bear, what I'm bringing to pass into the world. And the future is undetermined. It's open. A God of an open future. Don't ask me what I am. Ask me what we are becoming. That's what he says to him. So the first question is, who am I, God? And the second question is, who are you, God? Who are you? Let's go farther. Ready? Third one. Third time Moses pushes off God. God says, go gives them the rules. Here's what I want you to say to them. Go assemble the whole people and tell them what's going to happen. I'm going to smite the Egyptians. I'm going to whack the Egyptians. And I'm going to bring my people out. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. But Moses spoke up. He got a lot to say. And he said, what if they don't believe me? And they don't listen to me? But say, the Lord did not appear to you. What if they don't believe me? On the one level, that's, of course, Moses' insecurity. That's always been Moses' insecurity. That's going to be Moses' insecurity for the rest of the Bible. What if they don't believe me? But listen to the question even deeper. His first question was, who am I? And the second question is, who are you, God? And the third question is, who are they? Who are they? Who are these Israelites? Why are you so interested in these Israelites? If you're really the God of everybody, why are you so interested in these Israelites? Who are they? Why do they deserve your liberation? Who is this Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob you keep referring to? What makes them distinct? What if they don't believe me? What if they don't believe you? I mean, he's foreshadowing the drama of the rest of the Torah. He's foreshadowing the drama of the rest of the Bible. He's foreshadowing the drama of the rest of Jewish history. You're a God of liberation, a God of justice. What if they don't believe you? What if they don't want to follow you? What if they're not ready to get in line? Who are they? Remember, his last moment was not a pleasant one with Jews. I don't know if you've been to a board meeting recently, but, they can get unpleasant sometimes. Good, well-meaning people. Sometimes. Who are they? Who are they? Who is this people? And who would you want them to be? What are you trying to do with them? Who can they become? What kind of people do you want them to be, dear God? What if they don't believe me? And he gives them magic tricks. He says, throw your stick down, it'll turn into a snake. Put your hand in your thing, comes out leprosy. Put it in again. Pull a rabbit out of a hat. Remember in that movie, Oh God? George Burns plays God, which is wonderful casting. And the attorney in the court says, how do I know you're God? Make a miracle. He says, okay, give me a deck of cards. I'll make a miracle. Magic tricks. The magic tricks really demonstrate the presence of divinity. Or is it something deeper than that? Is the presence of divinity going to be represented by a people which embodies divine qualities, godliness, divine qualities, and divine morality? So the first one was, who am I? Then who are you? Then who are they? And now look at verse 10, chapter 4, verse 10. Moses said to the Lord, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in past times or now that you've spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And the Lord said, who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Lo ish dvarim anochi. I'm not a man of words. Again, ostensibly, this is Moses' insecurity. And the tradition is that he had some sort of speech impediment, but it's much deeper than that. I'm not a man of words. I spent 40 years in the desert tending sheep. I'm private. I'm quiet. I'm not public. Or more than that, I haven't a message. I live my life in my own way, loving my family, taking care of my people. I don't have a message. I'm not a leader with words, with a platform, with a message to the world. I get up in the morning, I do my job, I come home, I eat my meal, I sleep quietly, I wake up, I do it again. I'm not a man of any message. Now, here's what's ironic. Not ironic. I think the word's more, it's actually quite spectacular. At the end of the Torah, the last book of the Torah, begins with the words, Ve'ela hadvarim asher diber Moshe kol bnei adat bnei Israel. These are the words that Moses speaks to the people of Israel. Between here and the end, and between chapter 4 and the first chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses becomes ish dvarim, a man of words. He finds his words. How do we find words in life? What are the experiences in our lives that have taught us who we are and what the world expects of us? What happens to us to give us wisdom? What is it that gives us the power to sit with our children and say, all right, here's what life has taught me? And how do you gain those words? That's going to be one of the mysteries of the Torah, and one of the truths that the Torah is going to very subtly and very carefully reveal to us. Is it in the successes we have, or is it in the failures we have? Is it in the relationships that we cherish, or is it in the moments of solitude? When do we gain words? How do we gain words? And maybe what the Torah is pointing to at this point, that this is the great human project. The great human project is to become an ish devarim, a person who has something to say to the world, a person who has discovered words, discovered ideas, discovered values, discovered morals, discovered the truth of the world. That's what we are in the world to do. So Moses' question so far, who am I? Who are you? Who are they? And what is the truth that I'm supposed to bring to the world? What is my truth, God? What is the truth, and how do I find that truth that I'm supposed to bring to the world? And again, this is what the whole rest of the Bible is about, and this really is the whole task of religion. So I'm going to suggest to you that what we have in this chapter is a turning point in the life of Moses. It's a turning point in the drama of the story. We said last week that history is often told as the story of kingdoms and states and presidents and congresses and social movements, technological movements, political movements, war and peace. But sometimes history is in the life of one soul, one human being. And here is one human being who is so much like all of us, so human, and yet in many ways so much more advanced, because he understands the questions that you're supposed to ask in the course of your life. Who am I? Who are you, God? Who is this people, and what are they to become? And what is my truth, and where am I to find it? And then one more time, fifth time, Moses pushes back on God. The fifth time Moses puts back on God, and he says to him, send somebody else. Look at verse 13. Please, O Lord, make someone else your agent. And here, God loses it. God gets angry and says, you're going to go. I'll send Aaron, your brother, but you're going to go. Send somebody else. No, not send somebody else. Send somebody with me. I'm prepared to take the journey of life. I'm prepared to wrestle for the whole of my life with these questions. Who am I? Who is God? Who are my people? What are they to become? Where is my truth? But I want to do it alone. I want my brother with me. I want my partners with me. I want my people with me. God, don't just send me. Send someone with me. And Aaron, his brother, who will accompany through the whole journey of his life, will betray him, and he'll support him and comfort him. Aaron's going to go with him. The purpose, it seems to me, I think, of these chapters 3 and 4 is to show us the turn in Moses, which is part of the drama. But more, it's to tell us these are the questions that the rest of the Torah is going to come to answer. And these are the questions all of us in the course of a lifetime have to come and answer. And you understand that there's no word for religion in the Bible. So this is really what life is about. These are the great questions of life. And Moses has discovered them. And this is the beginning of his great adventure. And as we read his great adventure, this is the beginning of ours as well. When you sit down to your Seder table this year, you'll be online on Zoom or you'll be with a few small group of people at the Seder. Talk about Moses. Talk about what makes him the man who leads us. Talk about what makes a leader. Talk about the great questions that he asks. Talk about how he settles this conflict in his identity, to be Egyptian, to be Midianite, and to be Israelite. Talk about how he finds his truth and when his truth becomes his truth. And talk about how we all find our truths. Have a wonderful Seder. There'll be lunch and learn on Wednesday afternoons, but not next week, because next week is already Erev Pesach. So next week, which is the 8th, there'll be no lunch and learn, but there'll be lunch and learn during Chol HaMoed, Monday and Tuesday. Then the following Wednesday, of course, is Pesach. So once again, there's no lunch and learn next week. There will be lunch and learns Monday and Tuesday of Passover, of the Chol HaMoed, and then we'll pick it up again after the holiday. I wish you well. Take good care. Look at vbs.org, VBS at Home, for our full schedule of all the stuff that we're doing. Take care of each other. Take care of yourself, and be well.